And welcome back. Today we're going to get a little bit into some scene management and namespacing in order to help make our code and program work better as we start developing and implementing those different features to really bring our game to life. So the first thing I want to talk about before we jump any further is keeping our code organized. Now we have talked about this a little bit, but I really want to help drive that point home because as we get more and more complex projects, it's going to be really important for us to be able to keep this in mind. And when we do this, we want our code not only to be organized, but we want it to be consistent in its various different iterations. This is everything from using, proper conventions for our variables or our class names to, making sure we have good names for things. If we have, for example, if we look at even our last game where we had the driver class, we probably wouldn't call it building because it's not a building. We're driving around a car. Now, if we had a driving building, that would be more appropriate, but we are driving a car. So even something calling it like car would still be appropriate. And that is a good way to be consistent with some of our programming. Now, where this really starts coming into play is obviously you might be doing this on your own, but if you had multiple people working together on the same project, this can lead to trouble. I'll just give you an example here. Let's say you have two programmers who both create a method called movement, but the first version is going to control the player object, while the second movement method controls enemy objects. This could lead to some problems, as you might expect. If they're both trying to move, and you try to move the player and move the enemy, and they're both doing the same thing, you can start seeing where there might be a source of conflict. And therefore, we're going to use consistency and structure to help avoid such conflicts. Even looking at our previous example, very easy way to fix that is we could say, well, the first version could be called player movement, because then it's going to specify that is the player that is moving. Whereas the second one could be called enemy movement, because it's specifying it's that the enemy is moving. Now, the things that we have to kind of keep in mind is that there's going to be a general flow of how things operate from our coding side in C#. And we've already seen some of this, but let's just put a little bit more formal touch to it. C# operates at the highest level with a class as your biggest structure. And inside of every class, you'll have multiple methods, 1, 2, 3, how many ever methods your class needs. And inside of each method, you're going to have statements. These are those single lines of code that we use to go ahead and have different things happen, whether it's a debug statement or we're setting a value for such as a position. And let's just take a look at one of our classes we've done this time. We have, for example, player control. Two methods that might be inside of our player control. We have the start method and we have our update method. And just to give you an example of one of our very many statements that we have our if-else statements inside of there. And here is, of course, our code that we actually are seeing. And you can see here's our class. Here's those methods that we have talked about. And of course, here are some of those individual statements. Now, if we look at some of our other classes, like for example, we look at finish line, we can see we have those same structures. So here's the class structure. This is a method. And here are our individual statements. Now, there are some other things in here that we haven't talked about, such as using. Using is simply just saying this is a class or a body or library of classes that our game is going to need to use. So for example, if I were just to comment out right now this using Unity Engine, we would start getting a bunch of errors here. You can see they start popping up because it's using these Unity Engine scripts to go ahead and add these in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and uncomment that there, save that back in. And what we want to do is actually bring in another script because we have this debug log.finish, which we can leave in there right now. But we want to use using, and we have, of course, have our Unity Engine. And if I go ahead and just bring that in and hit dot, you'll see we get a huge long list of available pieces here that we can use to add into our game. And so you can see there's a bunch of different things here. Or if I just say using Unity dot that way as well, you can see again there's more things there as well. But we're going to stick with the Unity Engine. And what we want to do is get in some ability to manage our scene because we're trying to reload our level. So right here you'll see an option for scene management. So I'm just going to double click and add a semicolon there. And so right now it's kind of grayed out because we're not using it, but that's okay because we're about to do that. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to add in here. I'm going to keep my debug log in here just so I can make sure things are still working. But I'm just going to go ahead and add in the ability to start using some of this scene management. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to add in a new object here to our code, and that is the scene manager. All right, now scene manager we haven't used yet, but if I hit dot, you can see we again get a list of options. What we want to do is load scene. Our open close parentheses and a semicolon, and we do have a red squiggle here, which means something's not quite right yet because there's a little bit more we need to do to kind of make this work the way we want to. But this effectively is going to say, hey, take the scene manager and load up a particular scene. We want to reload, or in this case, initially load, or whatever we want to do, a particular element. So what we want to do to get rid of that error here, because you can see it's kind of angry with us down here. It says it takes in 0 arguments. What does that mean? It means we need to pass in a value to it. So to do that, if you think about it, this is a scene manager and we have a folder called scenes, it probably means we need to do something with this scene here. Well, the first thing I want to do before I can't really get too crazy, I want to make sure this scene has a little bit more context. Right now, if you notice, it's called sample scene, and that's great, but we want to have it some value too. I'm just going to right click on this, and I'm going to choose to rename it. And let's just go ahead and call this level 1. All right, and so this is our first level. We call it level 1. And then what we want to do is come up here to go File, and we're going to go to our Build Settings. And in our Build Settings, you'll see it now shows up here as scene/level 1. Perfect. And over on this far side here, you'll see the number 0. 0 referring to the index of the scene. So that's the level of the index where it's at. If you had multiple scenes, you go 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, etc. It's the order for you want those scenes to appear. And so that's fine. That's what we really need here. It's this level 0. Very often when we do with programming and do with arrays or anything like that, you'll see that this is a value that starts at 0. And so that's the easiest thing to remember is here we're not actually starting at 1 for our first value. We're starting at 0. All right, so since we know that index, we can go ahead and just plug in here that value of 0. And you notice the reds go away, so we can save this. And that should now make it so we can restart our level when we hit that finish line. All right, Unity's happy. It looks great. So I'm going to bring this back over. Boop, and let's go ahead and get ready for our guy to run. And we should see that when this guy hits that finish line marker, here he goes, boop, and he's right back, starting that level over. Awesome. Now, that, of course, is only half of it. We also need to set this up so we can do the same kind of thing, but for when we hit our head. So I want you to go ahead, pause the video, and see, since we saw how we can do this with the restart, how can we do that now with if we were to hit our head? All right, so hopefully you went ahead and did that challenge. First thing I'm going to do is, before I actually go ahead and do that, I'm actually going to go ahead and kind of zoom this out just a little bit. I want to make it so that I have the option for that player to bump his head. So I'm just going to grab this finish line here. Since I know this is working, I'm just going to go ahead and move that out to here now, so it's a little further away. That's perfectly fine. And I'm going to then get ready to set this up so that we can use that player tag. So that means I got to go back over into my coding to go ahead and set that up. So much as how we did this here inside of finish line, we're going to do something similar inside of crash detector. Now, I'm going to go ahead and add in the scene manager, and if you notice when I start typing this in, boop, Unity is like, hey, I need this, and so you see automatically add the script for me. If it for some reason doesn't automatically add that script for you, you can go ahead and just add that in. So just Unity engine.scene management, and then we're going to use dot, and we're going to do load scene. And what scene value are we loading here? Well, we should be loading effectively this whole level over again, so we're just going to go ahead and put 0 again in here. Don't forget your semicolon, hit save. And let's go ahead and get ready to test this out with our game. So here comes our dude. He's along skating. Let's go ahead and get him to flip so he falls on his head. Boop. Oh, and then he landed right on his head. And so when he did that, you can see we restarted that whole level right on over. Awesome. So this is looking pretty good. So we have a awesome set of things working here. But of course, there are some things we'll have to fine tune, things we want to add to our game. But we have a great start here going now.